Cool, awesome. So yeah, so I did a project with Spotify measuring the popularity of older music for this really nascent data journalism site that I've put together over the past couple months. And the impetus for the whole thing was I was walking down the street one day and I was listening to my favorite song, No Diggity by Blackstreet, came out in 1996. And I was like, this is a great song. In fact, I think it's so good that my children's children will hear this song and be like, yeah, No Diggity, I love that song. So I'm imagining, my hypothesis is that the way that my children's children will think about No Diggity in 2050 is the way that we reverently think about Frank Sinatra in 2015. So they will be essentially the pinnacle of artists from an entire decade that is remembered 60 years from now. And it was really hard to measure this up until now. So we always had Billboard data and album sales. But they only told us about newly released music. So we had no idea how popular Elvis or Frank Sinatra or Etta James is today until Spotify. And Spotify is interesting because it's a really good proxy for cultural relevance. So there's plenty of other data sources that I could argue would be better than Spotify. But Spotify is good just because it's very intuitive. And the argument is that more plays on Spotify means a track or an artist is more culturally relevant, and fewer plays means it's fading into obscurity. So the other interesting thing is I wanted a really good data set than just using all of Spotify. So there's this thing called the Whitburn Project, which is publicly available on the internet, and it's every track that has ever charted on Billboard ever since 1890. And has all the track information and how well it did week by week. And it's 50,000 rows, so it's really robust. So that's the data set that I ended up using. So I have two data points: present-day popularity on Spotify and historic popularity on Billboard. All right, so let's look at the data. And these are the most popular tracks from the 90s. And the interesting thing is we have Nirvana here with Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is the most popular track from the 90s, and it was released in 1992. And there's a couple other really interesting surprises on here. Goo Goo Dolls at number 2 for their song Iris. And again, the really interesting thing about this data is that these aren't really popular songs. So Smells Like Teen Spirit never even reached the top 5 in 1992, and now it's the most played song from an entire decade. And we can kind of do the same thing for previous decades. So, and all these charts are online, and I'll give you a link at the end, so you can go through them if you want. Here are the most played songs from essentially anything that's over 10 years old, and we can just look at the 80s, for example. This is Don't Stop Believin' at number 1, and a lot of people might be surprised about that if you were born in the 70s and you grew up with Don't Stop Believin'. But now that might make sense if you're a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And the same thing for like the 70s. We have Bohemian Rhapsody, the most played song from the 70s, and there are a lot of reasons why that wasn't very popular in its day. It's a really long song, so it's hard for the radio to get behind it. So we have these really popular songs today that weren't popular in their day. So there's this interesting tension between present-day popularity and historic day popularity. So this is just some aggregate metrics for how well these songs did in their day when they were released. So again, Smells Like Teen Spirit didn't do that well relative to the 400-ish songs that were released in 1992. So essentially, there were 41 more popular songs than Smells Like Teen Spirit just in that year. And the question then is like, well, what happened to those songs? So we can just do some simple analysis, and you might notice that a lot of this is very straightforward. Like I actually went to looking at like regressions and models to looking at how this data was matching up to what I would expect it to be. But for the purpose of just making this an interesting piece of content for the internet, it's as straightforward as possible with as few abstractions as possible. So this is just Spotify play counts on the x-axis, and bubble size indicates how popular it was in its day. So here's another track, Enter Sandman by Metallica, which is farther to the right. So it's the second most popular song from 1991 and has a smaller circle size, so it wasn't as popular in its day. And then you have these tracks right here. So this is Baby Baby by Amy Grant, which was the 9th most popular song in 1991, and like it's barely played today for a number of reasons that we could discuss later. So this is just 1961, for example, and if you read the article I put together, I go at length into At Last by Etta James and why it's so popular today, and barely even charted in its day, and now it's the most popular song from 1961. So really interesting stuff there. Last thing I'm going to touch on with remaining time is, so we have not only historic data and present day popularity for some tracks, but if a song was released recently, we actually know what happens on a day-by-day basis. So we can look at either the decay rate or the growth of a song's popularity over time. So these are a handful of tracks that charted and did well when they were released in 2013 and how well they do today. So this is Get Lucky by Daft Punk, like really, really popular song, arguably too popular in the sense that it was so pervasive, like everyone heard it. It had a huge amount of popularity in June 2013, but today it's stabilized at a rate that is actually lower than a lot of songs that never were as popular as Get Lucky. So a good example of this is Counting Stars in green here. And you can see that like it never had the peak popularity of Get Lucky, but also grew in a very different way. And there's a lot of interesting data analysis to do on how songs grow in popularity over time and the speed and velocity at which they grow. And there's a lot to analyze in terms of whether this had to do with more word of mouth versus Get Lucky's radio play. So really interesting stuff there. I only have 5 minutes, so I encourage you guys to check out this link on Polygraph/Timeless. And that's it. Thank you.